Welcome to the Optional Boss Podcast. This is episode 39, and today me and Tyler are going to do a little bit of a deep dive, but not really deep dive, into the world of the Game Boy. This is a quite the topic for you, isn't it, Tyler?
I feel like I know the structure of how this episode's going to go, and to tell these people it's going to be a deep dive is a little misleading. I would consider it a wild flailing of the limbs in not the shallow waters, but not deep enough to drown. You're just a little worried about what's going on there. But all in all,
it's
you'll
more just above the neckline.
You'll be fine. You'll survive. You'll just be a little waterlogged. It's okay.
Yeah.
I am quite swell, and I guess I have water on the mind. It's a nice rainy evening, and as our longtime listeners know, I am quite the pluviophile. I enjoy a nice rainstorm. There's your callback, folks. You could say, I remember when he said that.
That word sounds so wrong.
It sounds so wrong. I don't like it, but I like what it represents. But beyond that, I'm pretty swell. I am looking into the bright horizons of gaming now that I am finally free of Final Fantasy VII, as per my previous mention. And, it's actually a pretty good time to have that finished up, because it seems like there's not a whole lot new and exciting coming, but there is some pretty exciting thing. They just announced that NES Championships Edition, which I locked in a pre-order for the physical cartridge with all the fancy goodies and the replica cartridge, which...
You want to kind of explain what the homage is for that?
See, I kind of know what they're going for, but it's not an exact replication of like the original challenge that they used to hold. That's what it's supposed to represent, which is really cool. And they had this touching trailer that was a nice throwback, and they had all the gang of previous winners. It was super cheesy. It was cheesy. But, kind of endearing, right? I'm not going to lie, at the end, I was just like...
cheesy.
Oh, it's Doug Bowser who's on the... Wait, that's not Doug Bowser. I guess that's just the kid who won it first. Charming. But yeah, to me, it seems like... Because I don't think it's just the 3 original games that were on the NES Challenge, and... No,
there's a lot more. Like, it's paying homage to the old I believe it was Nintendo Power that put out the tournament, which was Nintendo owned. So, and there was the actual cartridges for the people who participated. They only made like 100 gray cartridges and then 4 gold cartridges, and it was very select. Like the winners got the gold cartridges or something like that. I don't know if it was a draw or if it was the actual winners. But they had these tournaments back in like, I want to say 90s or 92, early on in Nintendo's gaming life cycle, I'll say.
I think it started in 87. I could be wrong,
possible.
But it is like, it was a long-standing thing. And the thing that I like about, those super limited cartridges is like back in the day, they weren't really prizes as they were more so like, here you go, kid, keep this junk. And
yeah, pretty much.
Then they become some of the most sought after media in video game history. So.
Oh, absolutely. And it's kind of neat. So like what this whole Nintendo World Championship thing is, for Switch is, I believe there's online leaderboards, and it's pretty much the same kind of idea. It's paying homage to those old tournaments that Nintendo used to put on, except they've obviously expanded it into multiple different NES games. Because the original, I think, was Super Mario Brothers Rad Racer, maybe, and Tetris.
I
think,
and
that
I could be
going
wrong
off memory here
because I don't know obviously what's included in the package. The game doesn't come out till June. July? Yeah, so it's soon, but all the same, to me, this looks like, and if it is like this, I'm excited. The NES Remix games that were on, I believe, the Wii U and the 3DS had them. I have mine on 3DS.
Yes.
And it's just little bite-sized, almost like micro game challenges from retro video games. Like, so for example, you would get a challenge from the original Mario where it's do the shell bounce by the stairs and get so many 1-ups. And so it would be little, just bite-sized, rapid-fire challenges like that. And this kind of seems to have that feel, and if so, I am super on board. It also, and I think this is a pretty just cute little detail about how you can have up to 8 players at once. And now, I don't know if this is exactly the amount, but I feel like they're going for that, like, the up on stage, the 8 kids playing the competition right then and there, right?
Yeah, like the whole idea is to pay homage to it, and that could be seen in the physical collector's edition, because it comes with that, like, a replica of that gold cartridge that they only made 4 back in the day.
Yes.
I think a good way of almost is describing what it appears to be, anyways, and we won't actually know until we see a bit more into it. But it's think of WarioWare micro games, just with different Nintendo IPs, and maybe not as quick.
Well, it's the best part.
You're given an objective to do it quickly.
Yeah, because whenever I would play WarioWare, I think the character's name was like 8-bit or something like that, and he always had the retro Nintendo themed challenges, and always were the best parts of the WarioWare game. So if it's just that's fantastic in my mind. So, and it comes with a bunch of random goodies.
It's pretty cool. I would like to see, like, posters instead of pins and stuff. I mean, I'm a little over getting pins. I don't care about pins, but
take them out,
at the same time, I just want the physical.
Yeah, it is genuinely a fact that I'm only getting the fancy deluxe one because that's at the present time, only way to get the physical. And you know what? FOMO be damned, but Nintendo's just bad for stock sometimes. So
yes.
So that's something I can
speaking of things that are physical coming out, Animal Well is getting a physical, so I'm excited for that.
Yes.
It's, for anyone who doesn't know, it's Video Game Donkey's first publishing with Big Mode. Him and his wife came out with a publishing company. This is their first title. And I didn't realize that it was actually made by an indie dev, Billy something. There might be 2 of them, but it seems to be doing really well. And that just warms my heart, like a genuine indie game by someone who genuinely likes video games.
Well, and it was like 7-8 years in the making, something like that. Like, this is a very finely tuned, crafted product.
It's a passion product.
Yes, and
speaking of passion products, let's you want to talk a little controversies before we get into the actual episode?
Ooh, we getting controversies?
Yeah. It seems like Microsoft and Sony are both, like, telling each other to hold my beer as they do something just stupid. Because we saw the whole Helldivers 2 incident, where it's like, okay, we're turning on this PSN network requirement, and which would be, it's annoying to have multiple accounts, but for this case, it's fine. Aside from the fact that there's 177 countries that do not have PlayStation Network.
Yep.
So therefore, they were sold the game on, not necessarily PlayStation, but on Steam, so on PC, and now they can no longer play the game because of things that would be implemented. So Sony doubled down and made it so you can't purchase the game in those countries. Right. That is appropriate. All those people who already played for hours on end no longer, just because they need a Sony account. And then they backpedaled even more and said, okay, we do not need the optional, or we're making the account linking optional. But they did not re-release the game in those 177 countries that they banned from purchasing.
Oof.
So those people still can't play, even though that they've bought the game.
Now, I know.
And no one in those countries can play anymore.
This is clearly not a knock to Helldivers. This is not the kind of game that would work that way. This is just one of the many reasons why I am in such support of physical media, because they can't take what I got.
Yes. And it's not Helldivers 2 fault.
No.
It's not Arrowhead Studios. It's Sony bumbling the thing. And even Steam came out today saying, yeah, it's not us stopping it. It's Sony setting those restrictions. And then they're coming out with Ghost of Tsushima for PC here soon, and it's not available in those 177 countries either.
Oh, so they basically Sony.
So this was
Ooh.
Which is stupid.
Yeah, there's a lot of way to not make money. My goodness.
Especially with Helldivers 2, like, it was critically acclaimed as a way to do a live service game.
Yeah, well, that's
just
the way
to
don't.
Shit the bed.
Yeah.
And then we got Microsoft saying, hold my beer. And then they closed down Tango Studios and Arcane Austin. who made games like Prey. Also Redfall, which is a game that they didn't want to do, but they were forced to, and it massively failed.
Sometimes you gotta work.
Yep. And sometimes you gotta work on something that's going to close your studio.
Yep.
Now, Tango Studios did Hi-Fi Rush, and Hi-Fi Rush was very, very well received. Why they got closed down, I don't know. And then the kind of foot in mouth moment is afterwards, where they have CEOs coming out and saying that they need more indie games or more smaller games like Hi-Fi Rush to be profitable. You just closed down the studio that made your most successful game.
Well, and the sad truth is as well, because Microsoft just started kind of going on this, like, we're not really looking into exclusivity tirade, which is fantastic, right? And it's one of the reasons why games like Hi-Fi Rush were available on PS5, and if I'm not mistaken, doing quite well at the same time.
Oh, yeah. And then, like, Hi-Fi Rush was one of their best-selling games.
Thanks, bye.
Yeah, pretty much. And then say, we need more like that.
Yeah.
It's like that meme of the guy shooting the guy in the back and being like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
What do you mean? What do we do?
Yeah. How did this happen?
So a lot of people are kind of on the brink of not on the brink. They are praising Nintendo for like how they've handled things, and they're just kind of over in the corner. Yeah, they're eating a little bit of glue, but they're just kind of doing their thing,
hey,
right?
You know what people want? A Princess Peach game. Not everyone, but some people do. And you know what? Some people did. And I'm sure, like, I don't think it sold super well, but it sold well enough that Nintendo's like, that was worth doing.
That was cool. Let's do something else now.
Yeah.
Right? They've closed studios, absolutely, but they just kind of chug along and do what they want to do.
I think
so. That's just Nintendo, and just in such a Nintendo thing to do too. It was the announcement of technically the Switch 2.
The announcement the announcement.
Yes, the announcement of the announcement, and it's just a Twitter post where the president of Nintendo is like, "Hey, I'm the president of Nintendo. We will be talking about our next console in the coming year, as it will be out in the next fiscal year or some shit like that. We'll be talking about it anyways." And there will be a Nintendo Direct coming next month.
We will not
be talking about the next system during this Direct, however.
Yeah.
Thank you, goodbye. And it's just like, I'm the president telling you about this, but I'm not going to tell you about this right now. It is coming, though.
Isn't it hilarious,
Hold your horses,
though?
Please.
This whole time, any kind of like speculation about any kind of Switch 2, and my whole stance on it has been, I will not give a damn until Nintendo themselves say it's a thing. Now they said it's a thing. I can give a damn now. I'm not going to start looking into like leaks and shit, but still, it's like,
no,
it's coming.
Because they've been saying leaks for the past like 2 years after the Switch was released. Yep. And you got to hand it to the Switch. The thing's flipping great. I mean, it's where I play majority of my indie games that I can get physical, right?
I kind of want to buy
It's just a nice little handheld.
Yeah,
I'm curious about the OLED. So if you get the OLED, I want to hear your actual opinion.
I have my eye on it, because especially now that they have announced the successor, I think this is probably the best time. Like, I don't know if it's going to go on clearance anytime soon, because they're still obviously banking that the Switch is still going to sell like it has for the last couple of years, right?
Oh, they've been holding off so they can claim that title as most sold home console away from PlayStation 2.
Oh, but at the same time, like, I think an OLED would just be neat to add to my overall handheld collection. But beyond that, actually, so funny enough, we haven't really been talking much about video games we played.
No.
And so after, finally being free, I mentioned in the last episode, there was a couple things I was humming on. I was looking at Octopath Traveler 2, but I didn't want to jump into anything that long. And guess who's 30 hours into Octopath 2? And you know
fell
what?
For it.
I did fall for it, and I'm glad I did. I am having a blast with it. Like, I don't know, I got maybe 20-ish hours into the first one, and it wasn't bad, but it just didn't kind of like, didn't grab me. I didn't stick with it, obviously. And this one,
I mean, I didn't even get past the demo.
Yeah,
the first one.
It doesn't seem all too different, but at the same time is somehow vastly better. I don't know. Maybe I have to go back to the last one and see maybe if it just wasn't my thing at the time, but I am having a great time with it. I'm not even going to bother going into the game itself at the moment, but I am going to say it has really rekindled how much I enjoy handheld gaming. Like, because Octopath isn't so much something that I need to have like on the big screen at all times. I can just kind of kick back on the couch, watch some YouTube, and then just kind of pick away at my turn-based RPG. And I can tell I'm having a great time because every time I sit down for a session, I have to put it down because my Switch is going to die.
Yeah, that is fair.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny saying that because I rarely use my Nintendo Switch as in handheld mode.
Typically, I don't.
It's just a home console for me.
Yeah, but this has been, and there are certain games that just fit the handheld mold so much better. Like, Final Fantasy VII, I wouldn't have wanted on a handheld, even though it might have been a more comfortable experience, right? But something like a turn-based RPG or something just feels right at home to just kind of kick back and just kind of, I don't have to give it my undivided attention, but maybe I will if I get really into it.
I hate trying to play Tetris upside down on my couch.
Ooh. Yeah.
Just trying to get comfy.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, I think that's rather relevant to our discussion that we are going to be having today. But also, I guess we should also mention what the heck have you been playing?
Yeah, I'm here too. I want to talk about things I've been playing. I've been playing Stellar Blade.
Oh, actually, you got it the actual version, not just the demo.
Yes. I got the actual. Yes, I did play the demo. That's right. And it's kind of funny because the demo, it didn't really sell it to me. I'm like, okay, I see what they're doing, and I could see how this could be enjoyable for myself. And then it wasn't until like once you beat the demo, it unlocks like a new boss that you haven't fought yet. So you fight that. And it was during that fight that it kind of clicked with me and was like, oh yeah, I really enjoy this.
The real taste of the game.
I was gonna hold off and not worry about it too much, and then it's just like, you know what? I got nothing really on the horizon. I finished up Shadow of the Colossus. That's such a weird game. So I picked up Stellar Blade, and it's like, okay, this is actually I'm enjoying it. I haven't got I'm a little far, but I don't actually know how far. Criticisms I will say, story so far, whatever. Voice acting leaves some room to be desired for modern day voice acting.
Well, I don't think Stellar Blade is a full-blown AAA title, though.
No, I don't think so. Although at the same time, it has that AAA price tag.
Like Returnal.
So one could argue. Yes.
Yeah,
Returnal's voice acting was pretty good.
Actually, I think Returnal's kind of a AAA game. That was kind of a big deal for the PS5.
But its team was about on the same point as Stellar Blade.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a fine game. The gameplay is really, really solid. I'm really enjoying the actual gameplay itself. Story, yes, it's neat to see where it's going to go, but I'm not holding my breath for something fantastic, especially coming off the heels of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which is the story I know, but told in a different manner.
It's like you do until you don't with that game, that's for sure.
Yeah, pretty much.
Now, and with Stellar Blade, would you say, because I know it's had its comparisons to Souls, but like, would you say it's more Souls or more like almost Devil May Cry-ish?
I would put it in close with almost Sekiro.
Okay, so it's got some pretty precise, deliberate kind of combat, but it's not as weighty as something like Dark Souls.
Yes, like your deflections and your dodges are kind of time-based. So depending on what you have, you got things that are better to dash through the enemy for, things that are better to parry off of and then do a counterattack, and some are better to do a backflip and away from.
And you have a gun.
Yes, you do, which is actually your drone partner.
Oh.
So like you get the guy who saves you in the very beginning, and he just kind of follows you as a drone, almost like Navi in Legend of Zelda. Right?
Not like Nier at all.
No, not at all. But then when you want to use him as a gun, you can. He just attaches to your arm and you aim it like a gun.
Well, that's kind of neat. So it's not like how they do it in Nier, though.
Oh god, no.
No,
this actually attaches to your arm, and then you have to aim.
It's kind of hard to do a game like Nier anyhow, because that's just like, it's a shoot 'em up that's also a third person action game. It's kind of the most wild mixing of genres.
Nier Automata is great. Yeah. I have yet to play Replicant. I guess Souls comparison, there's some more, like when you rest at one of the campsites, enemies respawn and your healing flask will regenerate.
See that?
So there's that standard Souls trope.
If that's the only thing you got, though, that only makes you so Soulsy, right?
Yeah. No, is Souls, the actual terminology for Souls needs to be a little more defined, because people are just tossing it like they say Hollow Knight's a Souls-like, and I don't think that's true at all.
See, I think the best, and if I'm not mistaken, I'm quoting Mr. Maximilian Dude, and probably the many people who've also said this, but games like Lies of P aren't a Souls-like, they are a Souls game.
I mean, sure. But let's not try and create another confusing situation like Souls-like and roguelite and roguelike.
I think the more so the way to define it is the like is, takes elements, as where just the straight up Souls game is like, nah, they're going for exactly that.
Yeah, which is what Lies of P was.
Exactly.
Then after that, I don't know how long that's going to be. There's a few things that I might dive into, but one game I'm kind of itching to replay or check out again on my Switch is Loop Hero.
Ooh.
And that was one game that I could use as a handheld for my Switch.
Yep.
So because you don't have to sit and focus. You can kind of just have things go into loop. So speaking of handhelds, let's get into our actual thing. And yes, I brought up Loop Hero just for that segue.
That was a fine somersault of an entrance. We'll be right back.
We will be right back after this. So the Game Boy had multiple variations. There's the Game Boy, the Game Boy Pocket, Game Boy Light, Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color. Today we're just talking about really just the Game Boy in general. We aren't talking about the Advance. We aren't talking about the Color. But we're talking about just the Game Boy. And I guess in essence, Game Boy Pocket and Light, right? Because they play the original Game Boy games.
So in a hardware sense, yeah, just the original Game Boy and the Pocket. And though we never got the light, I'm very sad I don't have one of those in my collection. But just original
Game really cool.
Boy hardware, and I love this brick. It is still
the original DMG.
Day, yeah, it's still so good to go back and play some of these games. Have they aged well? Oh, most of them, not at all. But
no, but I think for people like us, that there's a certain spot in our hearts that we just accept.
Doesn't have to age well to be fun. That's kind of my stance, right? Things age. That's what happens with time. And
well, we were just talking about Final Fantasy Adventure.
Yeah,
with K-Bash.
Yeah, and Final
Fantasy. Right, that was a Game Boy game.
It's still good. It's rough around the edges.
Not bad.
You got to know what you're in for, obviously. But if you're not going to be one of these people who can't accept games from this era, there's still so much fun to be had, and there was only, almost 1,100 Game Boy games released?
Yeah, about 1,024.
That's a lot of games.
Or 42, one of the two.
I pride myself...
Granted, we did not get a lot... We didn't get a lot of the titles. However, the Game Boy, if I'm correct, was not region-locked.
No, because that was back in a time when region locking was more of a hardware thing. So... And it's funny because I remember when I was actually just kind of getting into Game Boy collecting, and I was buying one, and I asked if it was region locked. And the guy selling it to me was like, oh, no, I'm pretty sure it's not. Like, I was buying my fancy modded Game Boy Advance. And so, pop in a foreign game, it works. And it's like, oh, fantastic. To which I then just find out that, like, that wasn't a sales pitch. It's just not.
It's just not.
It's just not. It's okay. It doesn't make the Game Boy Advance I got less fancy. It's still great. But still, it was just, he sold me a fake sales pitch. But yeah, it's great because a lot of these games are so simple that you don't really need languages for the most part anyway.
And just think, it's almost like the NES, like how it started off with in its game senses, like with very, very basic, nothing to really write home about. So the one I'm gonna speak about first is Super Mario Land, right? It was one of the launch titles. Aside from the pack-in Tetris, this is where Tetris got his big boom from. Yeah. But Super Mario Land, which was it was a whole other world for our buddy Mario here, right?
See, what I like about
those spaceships and
it's its own thing, and that's what's nice about it. It is very much just a smaller Mario on the go, but
they couldn't have like full-size Goombas or mushrooms or anything like that, right? Like they actually used hearts to heal yourself, I think.
Well, you couldn't actually. There wasn't even a big Mario, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you just had hearts. And, there's the Super Ball power-up, which is arguably better than the Fire Flower. And
oh, absolutely.
At the last level is a shoot-'em-up. Like,
yes.
And
in Egypt or something?
Is it Egypt? I can't remember.
Or Easter Island.
I know that there's some. It's a wacky game. It definitely
it is very.
It has
wacky.
More of a world
it's
tour
Peach,
feel.
Or it's not Peach. Who is it?
It's the debut of Daisy,
the princess. Daisy. Yeah.
Yeah. You have to save Daisy from not Bowser, but the evil alien Topanga.
But
yes.
If you think about it, it's very much like on quality level with the original Super Mario Brothers, right? Like in a sense of like hardware technology goes.
I mean,
and as the Game Boy got older and older, we started getting more and more advanced games, which was really neat. Same thing with the NES, right?
So for my money, I've played the original Super Mario Land. It's fun. It's got wicked music, which I will say
I still enjoy.
The Game Boy itself, for having such compressed tunes, pumps up some pretty wicked. I don't know. I'm a sucker for Game Boy music myself, but for my money, it's gonna be Super Mario Land 2. That game is still to this day one of the most enjoyable Mario games to play.
So that's kind of where my point was going was you had the Super Mario Land and then Super Mario Land 2, the 6 golden coins, and just the fidelity of tech that they had between those two games. It was almost on par with the original Super Mario Brothers on the NES to Super Mario Brothers 3.
Well, and what's fantastic about the original Game Boy, people, funny enough, we were talking about how the Switch's successor was announced, and people are saying, the Switch has gotten pretty old. I mean, yeah, but the original Game Boy, geez, I don't think they, stopped making games for 14 years after it was launched. This thing kept going. And it would, and this is just how Nintendo, other companies do it too, but this is kind of Nintendo's strong suit, is they take what they have and then they just squeeze every ounce of power out of it by the time they're done with it. They will have some of the most well-crafted, you look at the start of the Game Boy lifespan, where, you got stuff like Tetris, Mario Land. There's a lot of very basic arcadey games, games like tennis and stuff, were some of the first Game Boy games to come out. And
absolutely.
Then you look at Link's Awakening, which is almost as beefy of a game as Link to the Past.
You forgot that name though, didn't you?
I was thinking about it we got quite a few Zeldas going on here.
A Link to the Past, yeah.
Yeah, and it was supposed to be, Link to the Past light, essentially. And then they decided, it's different enough. We're going to do our own thing. And they, I don't know, it's at least maybe a 6 to 8 hour game. It's not long, but when you think about the original Game Boy, that's pretty good.
Your batteries only lasted so long. And granted, the 4 AA batteries that this thing took lasted quite a while. All things considered.
I didn't use batteries all so often. I actually had the AC adapter for my original Game Boy, and I have very fond, vivid memories of like sitting atop staircases near outlets, just me and my Game Boy and my big chunky cord with it, like.
Oh, see, I was the little shit that went around to all the remotes in the house taking double A's because I was out of batteries.
No, see, that was actually that wasn't until I got my Game Boy Pocket, because I believe the Pocket takes triple A's, and they were much more readily available in my household until I got through them all, mind you.
Yes,
the Pocket is probably. Like, I had the original Game Boy, I had the clear, chunky one, and then I got a Pocket, and I think it was just kind of new for the sake of new. I can't say I have a preference between the two.
They're pretty much the same, just one's very, very smaller, probably a little more ergonomically comfortable to use.
Fits in a pocket, that's the whole gimmick.
Yes, where the DMG, that thing is the grand old gray brick.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Could it be even more gray brick with certain add-ons, like the Ultraboy, the big boy, which was like this giant case that you put the Game Boy into.
Oh, is that the one with the speakers and
kind of lock, and then it it gave you buttons? Like full-on speakers, the big buttons for everything.
Magnified screen. It almost
full the magnifying screen. Yep. Extra like battery pack in it, so you could put like 6 AAAs or some shit in it. It was a big boy.
So for
the Ultra Boy,
my original big chunky Game Boy, I had a worm light, which was, I feel like most people had like some variation of the worm light for their Game Boy, and I also had the screen magnifier. But I hated the screen magnifier because it was very much like, it's almost like a 3D image kind of puzzle, where unless you're looking at it just the right way, it's not going to look good.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a charming solution for back in the day. It's like, how do we make this thing a bigger screen? We'll just put a magnifying glass on it. It's brilliant. But
the worm light, though, I think everyone had a worm light for the most part, which was just a little like, it was a little coil worm. It was like a crazy straw, but a light that plugged into the link cable port.
Yeah.
I think it was like cable port.
I believe so. It was at the top, right? So.
And the dials that used for contrast and volume.
Yep.
So if you're in like a lower light, you could like adjust the contrast so you can kind of see the screen better. And oh fuck me, just trying to see the screen half the time was always a pain in the ass. But you still love this thing. Like,
I think it's amusing.
Do you ever drive? Be in the back seat, getting a ride home or something, and try to play your Game Boy in the back seat, and just waiting for the street light so you could make your next move in Pokemon.
Very much so, and that is like it's funny how that's like a universally like nostalgic kind of thing for a lot of people who grew up with the Game Boy. It is. Right? It's almost kind of like when you talk to a bunch of people who open Pokemon cards, and they always say like, you gotta sniff the cards. Like, it's just one of those things that everyone did. Very much like the whole getting my glimpses of games via the street light, or having the worm light, but I'm not allowed to use the worm light in the car because it's distracting.
Yes, or it's like you can't turn on the car light because it's illegal. Yep. So says the parents, and then you grow up and it's like, no, it's not. You guys are freaking liars.
That's the reason there's lights inside cars.
Or your parents buy you headphones so they don't have to hear the bleeps and bloops of the Game Boy.
Oh, but I love them.
Or you'd even just have the sound off to try and save the battery life.
Yeah. No,
because as soon as that red light blinks on, you are in panic mode. You're like, I need to save.
If your game even has saves, most games back
if your game even have saves,
getting yourself a high score. Or actually, no, I find a lot of original Game Boy games are just super demanding. They're just like beat it in one sitting. Which now that
or you need a password, which guarantee you do not have a piece of paper and pen in the back of a car.
You just write it on the cartridge. That's a very charming detail when you're buying old cartridges and you see codes written on them.
Yep, and they're wrong.
They're wrong. Yeah. Now, one accessory I don't think I personally had though, but probably its most notable one, the link cable. That's kind of incredible that we were back in the day just, able to figure out that just multiplayer from handhelds. That's mind-blowing.
Oh, you didn't have a link cable?
I did not have a link cable.
Oh, really?
No.
So we had a link cable because, and this was the only game that we actually used it for, was I got a copy of Pokemon Blue and my brother got a copy of Pokemon Red. So we used to go catch them all, and that's what we did. We traded Pokemon through this little cable that we attached to both our Game Boys and share information with one another. And granted, yeah, by today's standard, that sounds so what, like big deal. And it's like back in the day, that was like I was on the playground, on the swing set, not swinging, just with a link cable, trading Pokemon with my buddies.
See,
what is the internet at this point?
I am more fascinated by the applications of the link cable beyond Pokemon. I'd say with Pokemon, it is the most iconic link cable game. But if I'm not mistaken, like even the original Tetris had link cable support. There was a lot of games.
I think so.
Actually, if you look...
Well, with Pokemon, you can do battles too, I think.
You can do battles, yes. It's battles and trading.
Yeah.
I'm just looking because I have a small stack of Game Boy games with me here. And there is kind of like a logo on cartridges that, if I'm not mistaken,
right,
like denotes that it's a multiplayer game.
It's almost like a blue outline on a black background, kind of link cable compatible or something.
Something like that. I don't see
Look like the ESRB rating, but for link cables.
It's wild to think that some of these games don't have ESRB ratings. Actually, now that I'm looking at them, a lot of them don't have ESRB ratings. That's so weird.
They wouldn't, because it wasn't around till what year would you say ESRB really started hitting strides?
I feel like it was 94.
93? 94?
Something like that, because it was in the Super Nintendo Sega era, right? Because it was, Mortal Kombat and stuff. It's actually funny. The only one that I seem to have on my stack, other than the one Game Boy Color game that I have, because of course that was a later date, is Killer Instinct. Because yes, I did bring in my copy of Killer Instinct for the Game Boy, and it is here just as the Game Boy tried to do everything back in the day, even fighting games,
it did.
Which wasn't good. There's not enough buttons for fighting games on the Game Boy, and yet at the same time, they have such a stupid charm to them. I'm
going to try and make... I pulled one of my things down without trying to make a whole lot of noise. Yeah, I got one here that just says original Game Boy game pack.
Yeah.
No ESRB rating. These other two do have one. And granted, this is when we start getting into not Game Boy Color cartridges, but colored cartridges. Because I got one that's in a black cartridge, and that actually had a specific meaning. And I didn't actually know this till I started talking to Tyler. If they are black, they can work on a Game Boy Color or Game Boy.
Yep.
Like they have a certain special color palette to it. So it kind of worked on both, where Game Boy Color games will not work on a Game Boy DMG.
They don't fit.
No, they don't. They're see-through.
So something
But yeah, that was Game & Watch Gallery 2. Which I thought would have been early on, but that has an ESRB rating.
That's hilarious, because I also have Game & Watch Gallery 2 here.
That's actually more hilarious, because this is your copy.
I have 2 copies?
Apparently.
Interesting. Now, something I did just notice, which I'm sure I've noticed before, I've looked at these lots, but also on my copy of Killer Instinct, in the corner there's a little colorful thing that denotes that this is a Super Game Boy game pack.
Yes. And oh, God. We haven't even talked about the Super Game Boy.
The Super Game Boy is so cool, and I'm so pissed I didn't have one when I was a kid.
Yes. So, for those who don't know, the Super Game Boy is essentially a cartridge for the Super Nintendo that has the innards of a Game Boy inside it. So you could play Game Boy games on your Super Nintendo, so on the big screen.
It's amazing how much it is just a Game Boy crammed in a cart.
That's pretty much it. It's like, how do we do this? Oh, no, just put a Game Boy in there, right? Now, unfortunately, this is getting a little technical, but the clock speed of the Super Game Boy is not correct. It doesn't actually use the same timing as an actual Game Boy. So things are sped up they're sped down slightly. So they run worse on the Super Game Boy than the actual Game Boy.
Yeah,
So music isn't right, gameplay isn't right, things don't calculate right. That can be fixed with a bit of modding, but yeah.
It compensates for, because if you were playing on the original Game Boy and motion was going really fast and you would kind of have that ghosting effect.
Yeah.
It would mitigate that, even though it wouldn't be possible on your TV screen. That's the technical reason as to why we'll slow it down.
I think they just fucked up.
Yeah, they probably just fucked
to
up.
be honest.
But, because they did come out with a revised, I think they just called it the Super Game Boy 2. And
yes, and that does not have that issue.
No.
But that was only released in PAL regions, I believe.
PAL and Japan, or maybe just Japan.
Yes.
And it also can play Game Boy Color games, which, even though the Super Game Boy... Yes. The original Super Game Boy, it did some cool things where you could kind of put your own custom color palettes into games. And, make it look a little better than the gray or green on your TV. But with games like Killer Instinct, or more notably, the Donkey Kong 94, which such an incredible game, but they actually had some built-in compatibility with it to the point where you would have custom borders, they would have richer, fuller color palettes for the game, and there's an even wackier case of Super Game Boy stuff. Do you know about Space Invaders for Game Boy?
No.
So, this is actually wild. Space Invaders for Game Boy, just plain old Space Invaders. When you pop that cart into the Super Game Boy, it's actually a Super Nintendo ROM. And it is its own Super Nintendo Space Invaders just on the Game Boy cart.
That's wacky.
It's nothing impressive. It's just Space Invaders.
Do you have it?
I don't have it, no. But that is something to look into.
I'm going to have to track this down to try. Yeah. Because I got a Super Game Boy and I got a working Super Nintendo.
Yeah, it is just an actual fully made Space Invaders for the Super Nintendo when you do that.
No, that's really cool.
Right?
I want to check that out. Just because it's one of those weird trivia pieces of history.
It's such a strange...
I got to check it out. It's like the whole reason I have Doom on Super Nintendo. It runs like garbage, but it's cool.
That's why I have a couple of those games. So for one that I have as Black Cart Game Boy Color game, and this is also another interesting bit of trivia, because if you put a black cart into an original Game Boy, it'll still play, but it'll have no color palette or anything, as where black cart in a color gets you a better, fuller intended color palette, unlike if you put a gray cart in a color, right? Because it is designed for it. But what is it called? Conker's Pocket Tales, which, Conker from Conker's Bad Fur Day. This is his game before he got that game, because he was supposed to be like a cuddly, friendly character. He
used to be nice.
2 different games.
Huh.
If you play it on the original Game Boy, it is a different game than on the Game Boy Color. It's still essentially the same, but there are some actual differences to the game itself.
Such as, do you have any examples?
Like level layouts.
I'm pretty sure we've talked about this before. But
Placements of things. I think there are some things that are missing and some things that aren't. It is not entirely the same game. It's almost like, now I'm not going to say this is specifically the case, but it's almost like a beta version versus a full release version.
That's kind of neat.
It's so weird.
It's very weird, but that is really neat.
The Game Boy is such a quirky little thing like that.
Yeah, the Game Boy, the thing was a tank. I mean, it survived, Vietnam? War in Vietnam, they found a broken-ass Game Boy, but it still turned on when they put fresh batteries in?
Now, I think they actually recently took that out of the Nintendo Museum.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, it is finally time to be put to pasture. But yeah, still turned on. I want to say it had Tetris in it at the time.
Oh, probably.
Everyone.
Tetris was the phenomenon with the Game Boy.
Everyone had Tetris. I had it, and I definitely played it, but I'm still not a big Tetris person myself.
Because you need to play Tetris Effect Connected.
That's what I keep hearing, yeah.
Another accessory that I've used, and I got the opportunity to check out, but I've never actually owned. I don't know about you, but the Game Boy camera.
Oh, I have a Game Boy camera. I don't have a printer. And even, it's funny because, it's not hard to get, it's not easy to get a hold of the printer these days, but, they are around. But the printer paper is damn near impossible because it's thermal paper, and all of the stuff will most likely be expired.
Okay, but can't you just use like receipt paper? Because it's all thermal paper.
You would have to cut it down to size, but you technically could. Now, the thing with Game Boy printer paper was it was sticker sheets, right? So, yeah, and because that was one of the things where you just you snap it and it's almost like a little like Polaroid printer, basically. But such a weird thing, and what I like about the Game Boy camera is it was the most powerful and smallest camera of its time, which is so weird that Nintendo's not only with this, but with the pedometer, they just we're gonna make this weird thing. Turns out we made it better than people that do.
Yeah.
It's what color?
Nintendo really embraced the wackiness with this thing.
What color was your camera?
I never owned it.
Right.
I just used it.
I have a blue one.
I didn't realize they had different colors.
Yeah, it was a couple different colors, and there was a special edition Zelda one that was gold. And I think because you can take photos and then add little like sticker sprites to your photos and make it look all weird. And I think there was like exclusive Zelda ones in that one.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
That's actually really cool.
Yeah, no. And this was just Nintendo just did this stuff because they were like, that'd be neat.
Because why not? I mean, they honestly, why not?
Yeah. And
they just had fun with it, and this thing just lasted for ages.
So here's an accessory I don't have, obviously, but if you think something like a camera is wacky, how about a whole fucking sewing machine?
Yes. Was this the original DMG?
Yes.
That it had like a plug-in for?
Yeah, the original DMG, it was basically, I can't remember if the cartridge was like a connector to the sewing machine or you plugged it into, I want to say, I think it connected through maybe the link cable slot or the cartridge itself. But you could set up like embroidery patterns and stuff like that on the sewing machine and actually use it through the, like, okay,
why not?
Yeah, there was...
All right, you know what's pretty wacky as well that they got in Japan?
That
was a cartridge by Bandai that was a pocket sonar.
Oh, was this a fishing?
At least in 98.
Yeah, for fishing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you could you actually dunked it in the lake.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So I think a lot of this, because there was also, I'm not mistaken, like applications for like doing your taxes and stuff like that on the Game Boy. It was cool because it had such mass appeal, especially in Japan. I guess we should kind of touch on the humble origins of the Game Boy, and I think it was Gunpei Yokoi, like the guy who was known as the father of the Game Boy, like on a long train ride home or something. He saw someone just, a businessman just bored playing with his calculator for something to do, and Game Boy.
Wasn't that for the Game & Watch?
It could have been for the Game & Watch, but essentially, like that's kind of the origin story of a handheld. It's so legend goes anyway. And so when you think about it, it's kind of funny that it got a lot of these, things that were supposed to be helpful applications, right? And this is a weird through line that would even go as far as like the DS with things like my stop smoking kush. But yeah, so there's weird peripherals that do stuff like that. I think there was one that could hook up to, I don't know, like a computer for like bank information and stuff like that. Game Boy was wild.
There was some a spell checker thing as well, and a translator from French and Spanish, I think.
Yeah.
There's probably some other ones, but the Game Boy just had so much wacky stuff, and this is just peripherals. Like we've talked a little bit about the games, but we've been talking more about peripherals.
I think it's
little accessories.
Yeah, the hardware itself was just so fascinating, especially with how long-standing it was, right? And
oh god,
just think about like the Game Boy itself. You see it knocked off so many times in media, and it's you can always tell like that's a Game Boy. It is mentioned very frequently in King of the Hill, which is just my favorite thing ever.
Yep.
It's had such a huge influence on just the landscape of modern media. So many things would be called a Game Boy for years. You know, your PSP, well, that's a Game Boy. Like,
well, that was Nintendo in general, right? Like, you had a PlayStation. It's like, oh, what are you doing playing the Nintendo?
This is Nintendo.
It was just the Nintendo.
Yeah.
The Sega? Nintendo.
Yeah.
Right? And now it's a little different in today's landscape. It's usually marked as PlayStation.
It's a little bit more distinct these days, but...
A little bit more, but for people not in the know, it's PlayStation now. Where more, back in the day, it was always, the Nintendo, because that was the name.
Here's one for you. Back when the Game Boy was, at its most relevant, did you ever use a Game Gear?
Yes, in the Kmart store that we used to have in town. I used to go up because they had one with Sonic on it.
Something about it, just somehow, even though it's technically a significantly more impressive piece of hardware, just wasn't as good.
No, and I think it was just the bulkiness of it, which is hilarious to say about because you look at the DMG, it's a fucking brick.
Yep.
But the Game Gear was a bit more bigger of a brick.
Yep. It was it's funny.
Cool
it's
that it had a colored screen and its sound was really good.
I would need one side
no
by
question
side,
about that.
But it's like almost the size of the Wii U gamepad.
Kind of.
The thing was beefy, and the fact that it took
just
6
thicker
AA batteries, and they did not last long powering. The thing was way ahead of its time. It had a color screen, backlighting, and just wasn't as good.
So was the Atari Lynx, but no one talks about that.
What?
The Lynx?
I don't think I've until my adult years, I never actually cross paths with the Lynx. No one.
Neither did I. No one.
The same
knew
with
TurboGrafx. They were an adult.
So yeah.
Yep.
No, it's
okay. Off topic, but the first time I actually heard about TurboGrafx was on the Wii shop.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The original Wii shop, and they had the Virtual Console, and it's like, what the fuck is the TurboGrafx? What is this?
I actually initially think
Load Runner.
I thought Load Runner's so good. I initially thought it was arcade games.
Yeah.
It's a very foreign concept to me, and it's wild to think that the TurboGrafx is pre-Super Nintendo.
Was it really?
I believe so.
I don't actually know when it came out.
I think it came out in '89, and it was so you had your NES, and then the Sega Genesis came out, and that was kind of the thing that was muscling out the NES. But Nintendo's cooking up something, and then you've got the TurboGrafx that is just hey, I'm pretty popular in Japan, and I don't think anyone heard him.
Hey guys, wait for me too.
Which is a shame because it hasn't. Anyway, back to the Game Boy.
Last topic on the TurboGrafx is I would absolutely love to own one, and I did look into getting one before, and that's a price tag. Game Boy wise though, you want to talk some games?
The
TurboGrafx, or do you have more weird wacky accessories?
The TurboGrafx has bonk, and so does the Game Boy. I've already gone on before about how my first experiences with the Game Boy were Kirby, which what a great introduction to gaming. I'd played games before, but that was my game. And also the ever infuriating Donkey Kong Land.
Okay, so I have mixed opinions about this because I had the 3 Donkey Kong Lands, and for anyone who doesn't understand what Tyler's talking about, they weren't quite like Donkey Kong Countries, the Super Nintendo, but they wanted to be.
They really wanted to be, and it's not that they're bad games; they're actually quite good. But they tried so hard to make them so detailed that it's so hard to see anything.
There's a little too much graphical detail that it became very hard to distinguish between background and foreground.
Yeah. Sometimes you need things to be a little bit more simple. And, I will say, Donkey Kong Land, all of them, are a graphical showcase for what the Game Boy can do. But, it's just because you can doesn't mean you should.
I still enjoyed them. If I could go back to them nowadays, I don't know, because I don't have all the time in the world. Whereas as a kid, I kind of did.
You gotta crank that contrast.
So maybe that's the difference.
Yeah. But good games all the same. But when I think, like, I have a hard time remembering the Game Boy games that I had as a child, aside from the ones that really stuck with me. So obviously Kirby and like Mario Land, Super Mario Land 2. Yeah.
So it's funny. I never had Mario Land 2, but I did have Mario Land 1. 2 we used to borrow off my buddy all the time. We used to have the Pokemon trading card game.
See, I never had...
Which I think you just had the first experience on the Switch Online, right?
It was so good. I would have loved to have that as a kid.
Oh, it was great.
But,
growing up,
everyone, you almost can't have the conversation about having Pokemon. If you had a Game Boy back in the day, you probably had Pokemon. It kind of took over the world, and
yes,
I don't have.
But it was later in the life cycle.
Oh yeah, no, the Game Boy itself,
which is hilarious,
have entirely lost relevance at that point, and then you're selling 3 copies of the same game on outdated tech. Like, it is a miracle.
There was some space in between them, right?
Yeah, I want to say there was about
like a year maybe
between red, blue, and yellow, but all the same.
Yes,
because I know I was, and I think this was a case of Grandma doesn't know what to get. So she got me all 3 for, I can't remember if it was like Christmas or my birthday. Like, it was one of those things where if it was a mistake, it was the best mistake. And
oh, absolutely,
yeah. So
that sounds like a fantastic mistake. And to be honest,
because of my bias, it's my favorite color. Blue was obviously my favorite of the 3. I know you said you prefer the yellow because Pikachu.
So blue, because that was always my favorite color growing up. But I've also come to understand that, like, a lot of people don't actually like Pikachu, and they don't like yellow because you have to have Pikachu with you. I don't mind yellow because I used to love Pikachu because of the show.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I want to be like Ash. So I want the Pikachu out of the ball and following me around because I'm King Shit and he's King Shit Jr.
Now, I was a Digimon kid. I didn't get the channel with Pokemon, so I still enjoyed the games.
I mean, I like Digimon too.
Yeah. But you had much more relatability because you had actually watched the show. Yes. I did watch the heck out of that movie, though. My goodness.
Oh, the first movie where when you went to theaters, you got like a Mewtwo card
the first movie
that you couldn't read?
That is called the first movie. They knew there would be more. Oh yeah, no, definitely. Like, I was definitely part of the craze, the cards, all that stuff. Pokemon was that was gangbusters, as they would say.
Yep.
And
what other Game Boy games did you have?
See, it's
can you remember?
To recall original Game Boy games, it's tricky because as much as I love this thing now, it was definitely like, aside from the few that I sat down and played for hours, it was kind of almost like this is what I'm doing when I don't have the ability to play Super Nintendo, which was entirely the point.
Yes.
But one that I definitely remember having as a kid and putting so much time into was, as previously mentioned, Link's Awakening. That game is so good, and if I'm not mistaken, I did have the original version and then also got the color version later down, because I feel like it was one of those things where...
Which was a black cartridge,
It was a black cartridge, and it also had like additional content. Yeah. But I got it before I got my Game Boy Color, and it was one of those things where I remember you go to the dungeon, and it's just like, oh, you can't go in here if you can't see color.
Yeah.
And I remember later down the line getting my Game Boy Color and being like, I could finally do this thing in Zelda. Yeah.
It's funny. I thought we had the original, but thinking back to it, I remember getting that message. You can't do this unless you see color. It's like, oh, maybe we did have the DX version. Was it called? Yep. Yeah. So maybe that is the version that we had.
Another one that I definitely had and put a lot of time into when I was a kid, which I have somehow immediately upon remembering it forgot what I was going to mention. Oh,
I'm trying to think of some of the other ones, like Mario Land.
Yep.
I don't even know if we had Tetris.
I had Tetris,
which makes me think that,
but it wasn't my favorite.
I don't know if we did. We might have, but I just never touched it. Like I didn't grow an appreciation for Tetris till I became an adult. the Game & Watch Gallery, I think it was 4. Legend of Zelda DX.
Oh, of course. It was Donkey Kong 94. That's one that I had growing up.
Oh, yeah.
And I will continue to give this game praise. Like, I genuinely think you should play it. If you're ever thinking you want to play, like, the original Donkey Kong, don't. Play this one instead. This is still to this day one of the coolest puzzle platformers you will play. It's also the introduction of, like, so much of Mario's, like, core identity, like his triple jump and his handstands and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's so good, and it's got so much content to it. Like, I want to say there's probably somewhere between, like, 60 or more levels in that game.
That's a hefty amount for... I mean, again, handheld.
The final boss music goes so hard on that game. Like, oh no! I think Donkey Kong 94 is one of the greatest original Game Boy games of if we top 10 list, it belongs on there, right?
Right.
Now, that's
pretty high praise.
I do have a lot more Game Boy games now.
Oh yeah,
and. You know, as far as the collection goes, it was just kind of like, you know, picking up what I can, some more notable titles and all that stuff. But honestly, the thing that I really like about the original Game Boy is games that aren't even that good. Like, I can acknowledge they're not very good, are still fun. Like, I have one here, and it is, let's see, it's a Simpsons licensed game. Yeah.
Oh, God.
Bart Simpson Escape from Camp Deadly. And this is a very generic, just side-scrolling platformer. It's not very good. But I will still pop it in every now and again because something about that old jank is kind of fun to overcome.
Yep. No, and it's almost like muscle memory at times too, right? Like, you could almost argue that my nostalgia for Star Tropics 1 and its weird movement is the exact same kind of thing. Yep. Although I think Star Tropics was a little more praised than a lot of the Simpsons games.
I can safely say that even though I'm not a fan of Star Tropics, it is a better game than definitely all of the ones on the NES. That's for sure.
Yes.
But another one that, you know, I'm like, I don't think it's very good, but I go back and I play from time to time. It's Skate or Die Bad and Rad, and it's like a combat skateboard kind of game.
Yep.
It's kind of like, I think the modern day comparison to people would know, I mean, it's an indie game, but like the Ollie Ollie games, it's basically like that. I don't know, there's a certain charm, but then you'll think of a game that might be bad and it'll surprise you, like how I mentioned, I don't know, about a month ago, how I played Jurassic Park 2 on the, like it was the collection, but it was like the original Game Boy version, and yeah, there's nothing exceptional about it, and it was super easy. But for just an original Game Boy ROM,
it was an enjoyable time.
It was very enjoyable.
I mean, some of them do hold up, absolutely. And some of them, if you go in understanding that, hey, this is a retro game, there's going to be some jank, get off your high horse of modern day babysitting and just enjoy.
So,
I mean, modern games have really made us spoiled.
So is there anything that you've discovered later in life in the Game Boy that you've learned that you are playful? I mean, there's Final Fantasy Adventure, which, you know, playing on the collection.
Absolutely, because I didn't play that as a kid. No. That's for sure.
No.
Honestly, no. I will be totally honest. I haven't looked at the Game Boy library a whole lot since my childhood. There's been a few things on with the Switch Online and stuff, but not a whole lot. Like that. I have a list in front of me of all the North American games, and it's just like some of it's coming back to me. It's like, oh shit, that was a thing. Like James Bond 007, which was like a top-down.
It's Zelda. It's like a Zelda-like.
It's Zelda, but 007.
I've never played it, but I kind of want to. There's another one.
I'm pretty sure we had it, or we borrowed it and possibly stole it off a friend. Yeah,
so
I don't know which one.
007 is I think it's a black card or a gray card, but I do know it's an original Game Boy game. A similar game, though, might be Game Boy Color exclusive that I've always wanted to try. That's kind of like 007 in the sense how 007's nothing like the one everyone knows. Daikatana actually has a top-down Zelda-like, and it's apparently way better than the N64 game.
Really?
And there's a couple of actually cases of that. I own it. So the notoriously bad, though shamefully bad, because everyone wants to love it, Quest 64 I have a black cartridge version of not that, but the same franchise, and I think it's just called Quest or like Brian's Quest or something like that. And yeah, it's like a top-down RPG. It's significantly better.
I really want to play Quest 64 one day.
It's so
I plan on doing it,
but so charming.
I'm not going to beat it probably, but I'm just I feel like it's one of those things that are just going to fill me up with nostalgia, even though I have no nostalgia for it.
I feel like that is very much the best way to describe that kind of game.
Just it's going to take you a blast from the past.
So one thing I do like about the original Game Boy that it did a lot, and this kind of carried through, but things got a little bit more. I don't want to say in line, but more conventional. But when they brought, like, truncated ports down to the Game Boy so you could have, like, those experiences at home. For example, like I mentioned earlier, like Killer Instinct on the Game Boy. Like,
yep,
that don't work on the Game Boy, but boy, did they try.
They just shared the names. Yep. They knew it was nothing like the original, what they were trying to make a portable copy of.
Yep, and then
right
at the same time, one of my favorite Game Boy games that I have, which is basically just a truncated port, but this is a little different because this got ported to like everything from the arcade. It is my copy of Sagaya, which is otherwise known as like the Darius games, the side-scrolling shoot-'em-ups.
Okay.
And
yeah.
I don't know what it is about the original Game Boy version. Like, I love these games, but I'm not good at them. Shoot-'em-ups are hard. And I think just because the Game Boy game is so simple, it's so relaxing. And these are stressful games normally.
Oh, yeah.
So, there's just a lot of charm in that, like, they made it work.
One thing that we haven't brought up is, like, the Metroid 2.
See, I've not played the original Metroid 2.
No, but just how wacky is it to think that, like, original Metroid, or Metroid 1 was on NES, Metroid 2 was on the Game Boy, Metroid 3 was Super Metroid on Super Nintendo. We just got Metroid 5 on the Switch.
You know what followed a similar path until its path stopped?
Castlevania?
No, Castlevania kept going. I was actually going to say... Kid Icarus.
Oh, yeah.
Because you have the original Kid Icarus on NES, and then its second game, like officially titled second game, Kid Icarus 2 of Myths and Monsters, is on the original Game Boy. And I have it. I played it a little bit. It is the very similar relationship that I have with the NES Kid Icarus. This is interesting, but I'll do it later.
Come to think of it, I don't think I've actually played any of the Kirby games growing up on Game Boy. Game Boy Color, different story. Because I've played Dreamland. Oh, what are they called? Kirby Return to Dreamland or just Dreamland?
So Kirby's Dreamland is the very first Kirby game on Game Boy, which is...
And then there's Dreamland 2.
Dreamland 2,
right?
Yeah, which is also...
So I've played them nowadays. Yeah. I played them both nowadays, but like growing up, the only Kirby game I had was Kirby's Adventure on NES,
which is funny,
and it was in French. But granted, we are talking about the color Game Boy, but Kirby Tilt and Tumble was my first handheld Kirby game.
That's what I meant to mention. The Kirby, or not Kirby. Everything's Kirby with the Game Boy.
Kirby.
Well, one, if we want to talk Kirby just in general, how he was so wildly experimental on the Game Boy, where, like, you have Tilt and Tumble, and then I think one of the only Kirby spin-offs I have for the Game Boy is Kirby Pinball, and you know what?
Okay, yeah.
It's a pretty solid pinball game. There was also, I think it's called Kirby, it's not Star Stacker. I can't remember. There's a Breakout clone with Kirby, too, that's apparently really good, and, like, you can get power-ups for him and stuff, and...
Block Ball?
Yes, and apparently that one's really good.
And then there was Star Stacker as well.
Star Stacker is kind of like a Puyo Puyo thing. It's not quite Tetris, but it's along those lines.
Right.
But what I was going to say is not so much Game Boy peripherals, but Game Boy games that just did weird stuff, like had rumble packs. So the only one that comes to mind for myself immediately, there was a couple pinball games, most notably like the Pokemon Pinball was one of the first ones that had like you could put in like a AAA battery and the cartridge would
was a Game Boy Color game though.
It's a black cartridge though, so it does work in the original.
Oh.
Yeah, wild.
Okay.
But I also have, and I think this is also a black cartridge, did the same thing as Pokemon Pinball, and it's the Little Mermaid 2 Pinball. Yeah, yeah. There were some Game Boy Color games that also had that. I think Perfect Dark comes to mind, but I never had that, so I can't really speak to that. But even weirder than the Rumble Pack on, again, this is a black cartridge, but still original Game Boy, is, talking about it again, Robopon. The very first Robopon game, which is, I really want to find a copy one day. It has an extended cartridge because inside it has an infrared sensor. And there were a couple instances in this game where like you had to activate a switch or like open chests by pointing your TV remote at it.
Okay.
Yeah. Why? Nobody knows.
That's wacky.
It is wacky and unnecessary.
That's just one of those things that they did, eh?
And that's all it's for. It has nothing to do with anything else.
Huh.
Yep. Yep, they were just trying something new. Just for, I don't know, just some wacky gimmick. I don't even think that's something that would really sell a game, but...
No.
It's alright. They needed something to stand out as the absolute blatant ripoff of Pokemon that they were.
Oh, that's wacky.
It is very wacky. And I like how that would even carry on.
It'll be hard to play on the road.
It's just a little bulky, you know?
Yeah, a little bit.
But they would carry on this weirdness into, like, you know, the Game Boy Advance did stuff like gyro carts and vibration carts and stuff. So I like how they've always been willing to get that just a little bit strange with just Game Boy stuff. Now,
no, it's cool.
What are some? Is there any games that you can think of that you've not played but you've kind of looked upon from afar and you do want to try at some point?
Oh God. I mean, I want to check out any of the Castlevania games.
I can safely say so.
I think there's Castlevania: The Adventure and Legends.
There's 2 Adventures and a Legends, yes. And I think they put Legends on the Switch Online, actually. Castlevania Adventure 1...
And Adventure is on the collections.
Ah, yeah, that's right. Because I have Adventure 2, it's Adventure 2, Belmont's Revenge. And it's not bad. It plays a lot with verticality, which I think is actually a really smart way of working into the limitations, because moving horizontally for those games, that first one chugs. It chugs something fierce.
I mean, at the same time, like back in the day, that chugging we just accepted.
Oh yeah, no, that was just how games played out. It was funny because in my mind we didn't, consider it as the game running poorly. It was just slow-mo now.
It's, oh God, this better work.
It's helping me with them really tricky jumps.
Works exactly. It worked to our advantage.
Yeah.
There's no problem with it.
So, a Game Boy game that's surprising, I don't own any of these, actually. And I have played them now. Still, again, don't own them, but is any of the Mega Man games.
Right.
I don't have a single one. And I know, like, the first 4 are just basically, like, bite-sized versions of the NES ones. And then the 5th one is its own full-blown original Mega Man game.
I was going to say, I think the 5th one is just kind of its own thing.
Yep, they did their own wacky thing. And there was a couple franchises that did, it's like the Super Mario Land thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Which, speaking of, the Game Boy, Super Mario Land 2 brought in one notorious character into the universe of Mario, and that was Wario. Wow.
Yes, and the wild thing about that is Super Mario Land 3 Wario World. He got Yoshi's Island, did.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. And I understand why, playing it safe, but it's wacky because like the Wario games are totally different. I think the first one plays it pretty straight as like, it's still just a standard platformer, but you're pretty chunky. But like moving beyond that, Wario just becomes immortal. And they're these really weird puzzle platformers that are so good. If you've never played them, like if you can play, I think one of them is on the Switch Online. But I think it's Wario Land 3 actually, which is one of the best ones. They are definitely.
I wouldn't be surprised if 4 for the Game Boy Advance is on there.
If it's not, it needs to be at some point because it is Yeah, the Wario Land games are good. And another interesting bit of trivia about that one is the first Wario Land was kind of like a Legend of Zelda DX thing, but they just didn't make a big deal about it. The first wave was just released gray cart, just regular game, and then they just suddenly started pumping out black carts that had color. just for the sake of it.
They didn't really tell anyone about the black carts either, right?
Nope. No, I'm sure if you read the instruction manual or the box or something, it probably did. But who did that?
I got a dog barking.
Oh,
hang on.
Yeah.
All right, a little bit of a cut there. Had to let my dog out because he was a little barky at the door. So, Tyler, where were we?
I was talking about the Game Boy. Something to do with the boxes that nobody kept. And yeah. Actually,
same with like Super Nintendo and NES. It's like I wish I had a lot of those boxes, and it wouldn't even take up that much space given how many like little games I actually had for.
I don't know if I was such a monster to tear a box entirely, but I feel like I would have been the kind of monster to tear a box entirely.
You probably would have, yeah.
Yeah, actually, if we want to talk about me being just a horrible monster to the Game Boy. So funny enough, the original Game Boy that I have that you actually were kind enough to repair for me, way back when I was a child, it got left in the rain, which might explain all of that water damage. But inside my Game Boy at the time was my childhood copy of Super Mario Land 2, and my understanding of electronics is if they get wet, they are no longer any good. So might as well try to see what's inside. And so me and my friends took a hammer to my copy of Mario Land 2. Now, luckily, the Game Boy was spared the hammer.
Yes. Luckily, because that was able to be fixed.
Yeah. Now, that said, though, these things were designed to survive the beating of children. But I don't think they were meant to design to...
A hammer from a child.
No, that's a bit too severe of a beating. And,
a little bit.
Yeah, now I take much, much better care of my stuff. But
I'd hope so.
Yeah. No, but it's surprising for all of the Game Boy games that I own, I don't think any of my original Game Boy games have boxes or manuals. I think it's just cartridges. Now, some of my Game Boy Advance stuff and whatnot, yes. But these boxes are hard to come across now, my goodness.
It is sad because I don't have a single box from my NES or my Super Nintendo or any of those days.
Nope.
It's disappointing.
Took a while for them.
I miss those big ass cardboard boxes.
Yeah.
The only boxes I still have is for Sega because they were plastic.
Yeah, they have that nice.
And they aren't even my
cassette.
originals.
Yeah, it's
yeah,
much nicer. So no, that was definitely one of the things that did not survive. But all the same,
well, who knew that we'd want them like 20 years down the road?
Oh God, no one at all.
Right?
Yeah. At no point did I get a video game and go, "This is gonna look great on my wall in my 30s."
No, you get a new video game and you'd be like, "Fuck you, box! You're blocking my view."
Pretty much.
Trying to rip it out to play this cool new game that you just got.
Yeah. No, there's
right.
Oh, now I don't know. I could go on about these games for a long time, but I think what would you say would be your favorite games that you can think of for the game? If you had to give like a top 3.
Fuck you, that's not fair.
Well, I know I have a much, much greater chance to come up with
no, even still, like, I'd have a very hard time. Okay. Let's see what we could do here. Top 3 in no particular order.
No, just in general.
Let's do Pokemon.
Yeah. That's understandable. There's
I'm just gonna blanket it Pokemon for the 3 games because Red and Blue are very similar. Yellow is pretty much the exact same minus one little change. Probably some bug fixes too, but let's count them as one. So Pokemon.
Yeah.
The original Pokemon trilogy. Super Mario 2. The 6 gold coins.
Yep.
And God, I have it on the tip of my tongue, and I forget the name of it. We were talking about it today.
Bomberman.
No, I haven't actually played any of the Bombermans.
There was a crossover with Wario on the Game Boy.
That's weird. Link's Awakening.
I would say that's a pretty solid choice of top threes. Now, funny enough,
it's I'd say it's pretty good. No particular order, but that's probably the three that I spent the most time with.
Well, and your opinions would be significantly more based upon nostalgia for the Game Boy, as where I have taken to the Game Boy much more fonder in my later years. And
yes,
I genuinely sought out a lot of these experiences. Now, of course, the original Kirby's Dream Land is always going to hold a strong place in my heart, so that has to go within my top three. And then, just as a general one of the best games on the Game Boy, bar none, Donkey Kong 94 is still so worth people's times. Like that Mario versus Donkey Kong game that they just ported for the Switch, it wants so hard to be Donkey Kong 94 and isn't. But it is basically the sequel to it, right? So it's the closest modern experience you get. And then I would have to say...
That's fair.
There is, and this is when I would say I discovered it probably around when I started emulating games. And it is a sequel to one of my most beloved NES games, and that's Balloon Kid. And that's right, it's a sequel to Balloon Fight, but it's, instead of it being that more arcadey, like trying to pop the opponent's balloons, it's actually a take on the balloon trip mode, where it's like a constant side scroller, and makes it more of an adventure game. There's even boss fights, and it lets you do some cool stuff where you can pop off the balloons and run on the ground, and then it'll still keep scrolling, so you have to quickly pump the balloons back up, but you can get them back.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it is just a joy to play. Oh, and...
Huh.
Yeah, I would say I actually, I pop in a random Game Boy game, every couple months. It's still...
I do want to check out the Mega Man games.
The Mega Man games are alright. They're, they're not as good as the NES ones, but they're just... They're Mega Man on the Game Boy, and... It doesn't really need to get any more complicated than that.
I mean, I am mid-journey of my Mega Man journey.
It's a journey.
Going through all the Mega Man games and X games. I don't see why I can't put the Game Boy games in there, too.
Where did you leave
In
off?
some form or fashion.
Did you finish 8?
My next game is 8.
Ah, yes, the next one is 8. Now, here's the question, and if yes, I can provide it for you. Are you gonna give Mega Man and Bass a shot in that? Because it would technically be after 8.
Would it be?
Yeah, it is. It is considered Mega Man 8.5.
At some point, yes, but being not part of the main series, probably after.
That's fair. It is. It is definitely a an after kind of game.
Well, here's the thing. I know it's notoriously bad.
It's
right?
not notoriously bad per se. It just does some things
per se
rather poorly. I actually think Mega Man and Bass is great. It is one of the best looking Super Nintendo games there are out there. It's just, when the first fight in the entire game is with a devil, it's kind of setting the tone. So
I mean, I would almost consider it a spin-off. Yep. Right, so I'd probably save it for after I'm done the X series.
It counts as a spin-off. One of these days we'll talk about Mega Man more in depthly.
Yes. I need to finish 8, 9, and 10.
But if there was one Game Boy game that I really wanted to add to my collection beyond Robopon, obviously, there's a really quirky game. I think it might be for a Game Boy Color or a black cartridge. But it is basically Windows' greatest hits. And
what?
Yeah, this is one of the wackier cartridges I've actually discovered a couple years ago. And it has, Solitaire, Minesweeper, all that classic Windows desktop stuff on it. But you want to know what else it has? Okay. Which I think makes it one of the greatest Game Boy games ever.
What's that?
It's got fucking Ski Free.
Really?
Ski Free on the Game Boy.
Now, is this an unlicensed thing?
Nope, this is a fully legitimate release.
Really?
Yep.
That's fun.
Yep, it's something I really want to track down a copy of. But, I mean, I don't know, what do you think? I could ramble about things I want and things I know, but should we call it around here for these folks? I'm sure we'll revisit the Game Boy one other day.
Oh, absolutely, because we still got the Game Boy Color to talk about, and then Game Boy Advance.
Yep, and
two great additions to the Game Boy family.
Yeah.
But as for the actual Game Boy, I mean, I have so many fond memories of it. And it kind of sucks because it's like a lot of those fond memories are not built around a variety of games. It's very, very small list of them.
Yep, but it also left such an impact, even with only being that handful of experiences.
Oh, absolutely. Right? I mean, just look at Pokemon on itself, and I mean, I've brought it up a few times. So Pokemania, or whatever the hell you want to call it, that was huge, and that was
you had to be there, folks.
You'd have to be there.
The closest thing to it was Pokemon Go's release, and even then, that was just recapturing it. It wasn't actually starting it from scratch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's absolutely fair to say.
But the Game Boy still lives on.
Everyone.
You know, to this day, we still have people, obviously, like we have people doing DX hacks of these original games and printing out repros of them. Like, I would love to get my hands on a copy of like the DX version of Mario Land 2 because it runs a little better. It's got full color. Like, that's a game that deserves that kind of preservation and love. Mega Man 5
absolutely. It looks wonderful.
Getting a full-blown remake in the style of Mega Man 7. Like, that... People love the Game Boy still. It's just, you know, they are now taking these Link's Awakening got a full-blown remake.
Yeah, from Nintendo.
Yep.
And you know what? I'm going to say this before we close out. Fuck it. 3DSs and 2DSs are easy to mod. They are very, very easy, guided, and almost dummy-free. Do it, and then do Game Boy games.
Well, you know what they say, folks. You gotta play it any way you can.
But what's that from?
I think that's SNES Trunk. We should give him a shout. If he wants to talk about some SNES games.
Ooh. Revisit. So yeah, I hope this was a much better episode than our standard like year in review or the launch year or whatnot. We kind of wanted to touch base with the Game Boy overall as a whole instead of just doing the first year and saying, oh, we don't know about this, we don't know about this. So we wanted to try and revamp some of those. So maybe we will go back to the SNES and NES and talk about the shit that we love there.
Just talking about video games.
Rambling about video games, which is apparently what we're really good at.
We do what we can.
With that said, I think that is it for me. Is that it for you?
I think that's a wrap on the Game Boy. I mean, temporarily. I definitely want to play more.
Temporarily, yeah.
Yeah, let's tell them the socials and close ourselves out here.
All right, so you can find us over on Twitter or X or whatever the hell you want to call it. Also, Instagram at OptionalBossPC. You can email us at optionalbosspodcast@gmail.com. Feel free to leave us a review on your podcasting service of choice. Give us any kind of feedback that's warranted.
Tell us about the Game Boy.
Tell us about the Game Boy. Give us a comment on that. All that kind of good stuff. We love hearing from you guys. Our Twitter DMs are open, so feel free to message us through there if you want. And because you may not want it public with your name. Whatever you choose. But we've been Josh and Tyler. This has been the Optional Boss Podcast, episode 39. And we will see you next time.
Bye!